Hey, it's Random Code here, and today we're going to continue working on our CRUD full stack application. At this point, we now have a front end with when looking at the CRUD functionality, we can then read our data from our database and backend. We can then delete, and we would now like to add or create more specifically. So before we had the users shown here with the ID, name, email, and the status. We could then delete these users. And in the past version, we then had to use Postman to manually add a new user. I now have added a new user button, which then will pop up this, as you can see, very beautiful, very styled input form where we can add a name. So let's just do test name, test at mail.com, and the status is going to be no. We can then submit this form or this new user, and as we can see here, it's then added to the user list. And if we reload the page, we can see it's still here, so it was also added to the database. We can then add multiple of these new user setups, and for some reason I thought it would be interesting to ensure that these are like kept in order and the IDs are saved. So even though you can see we have 3 here, if we delete the middle one, for example, we always delete the middle one, not just the last one. Or if it's the last one or the first one, we still keep the last one. So actually the order matters, so they're not just random orders. For now, there's a few issues. For example, I do not have any input validation at all, so you can actually submit an empty user, as you can see here, but then once again, it's just very much to showcase the basic concept of having our APIs from our backend used in a frontend to create this basic functionality. But let's have a quick look at the front end of the code and Visual Studio Code, how it actually works. And one thing to note, once again, I am very much not a front end developer. So there might be some patterns or some structures of this that are kind of horrible, but works. And to me, it's just very much a fun experience of trying working with some more graphical front end stuff. But the basic concept, as we had last time, we have this app.js, where we have a map of all our users retrieved from the database. We now also have a map of this new users list, which for now is just a list of the IDs of our new users. And when we then click on add new user, we then add a new ID to this list, which then creates a new user component, React component. And we then pass it the ID to keep track of them. We then have two functions passed, delete user, added to the delete button, allowing us to delete itself, and update user, simply allowing it to return the information from the new user after the component itself have sent the data to the database. So if we go into new user area, we have a bit of functionality. We keep track of the name, email, and the status, the input boxes. And then for each input box, we simply have a label to showcase what it does, what it is we're inputting. We then have a type, text, email, text. We had a name for our input to then retrieve our data, just to set it up. And then on change, we actually don't need the name here because we're doing it using React, but for React, we then on change. So every time someone is inputting something into any of the text field, we're then setting these states up here. And when we then click the submit button or submit the form using our submit button here, we would then create a new user based on these input fields. We then send a post request to our, on our localhost 8080 create user endpoint with the body of our new user stringified. We then, when we get a response, turn it into JSON, and the response of this post request is going to be the ID from the database, which is the IDs we see up here. So we would then take this ID, and using the ID and again name, email, and status, we create a new JSON element, more or less here, and then send it to the parent of this child, so like the main page. And in the main page, we then call the update new user method with all the information. Update new user method simply takes in a new user and adds it to the user list, which is the list used to show all the elements up here. I think this is quite an interesting little setup, and I truly enjoyed creating it. But again, once again, it's not the most pretty front-end setup you could ever create, but that's very much not my focus of this project. But I genuinely think it was a very interesting concept of having these multiple user inputs that you can have like actually live at the same time. You're not just adding one element, you can be adding multiple elements at the same time, or at least creating them at the same time. And we're then gonna change in the next video, or change but add. So instead of just having a delete button, we're also gonna have an update button, which more or less just gonna change all these fields into something looking like this. Which would then allow us to have instead of a submit, we'd have like a save or update. So we could update them or appear. So we can change these instead of being just shown like the data. We can have them be input fields containing the data, which can then be updated and changed. But we are now actually getting quite close to the full functionality of my CRUD frontend. And after the next video, when we have added update as well, we're going to then Dockerize this setup so we can have a full Docker Compose setup, which then would be able to start both our database, our backend, and our frontend. Otherwise, if you enjoyed this video, please leave a like and subscribe, and I wish you all a wonderful